Okay. Sending data. We're online at YouTube. And we're online over at Facebook. Let's see who's coming on. Okay. Let's see how many we got coming in. Oh, we got one. Okie dokie. Treasure Plus connected. Okay. A few more seconds. 3, 2, 1. Okay, here we are. And greetings, everyone. Welcome back. And what we're going to be talking about today is racism and police unions. And nobody seems to be talking about police unions. But we'll talk about that later. But right now, let's talk about racism. What is it about racism? What is it that caused this incident, which is actually an example of what happens with a society that is just so easily affected by the media. And the biggest issue is the way the media is playing us and playing us against each other. And it's all about this right here, creating division. This is George Floyd right here. Okay. George Floyd was killed, and he was killed as a result of actions by a police officer by the name of Derek Chauvin. Now, Derek, we'll be talking about him real soon. But here's the deal. It's like this guy was killed. He was wrongfully assaulted in the manner that he was arrested. Basically, this guy right here. Let me get this out of here. Yeah, Derek Chauvin. This guy right here is the guy that basically killed George Floyd. What people don't really pay attention to also is that there were other officers on the scene. There was a, let's see, there was a J. Alexander Kuhn, and there was also a To Tao, who is of Hmong ancestry. So what is it about this right here? Because it seems like the way the media makes it look, it's just, oh, it's all about white on black assault. Instead of looking at it further, when you start reading about the history of this guy, Derek Chauvin, which goes further into more that this guy was just basically a bully who shouldn't have been a police officer in the first place. So let's read about Derek Chauvin. So he had 18 prior complaints filed against him. Okay, 18 complaints. Okay, how does a guy like this stay in a police department? And this is over years and years that Chauvin was getting these complaints. So they're keeping this guy working in a position that, if they wanted to keep this guy in the department, why is he not working a desk? Because clearly this guy was working in a position where he shouldn't have been working with any people whatsoever, because he's a bully. He was getting written up for using too much force on people. 18 times by the Minneapolis Police Department's Internal Affairs. He had 18 prior complaints before he basically killed George Floyd. Okay. But at the same time, what happens is that the media jumps in and makes it a white on black, and this is all about whites on blacks. But yet we see he's basically the only white guy. We don't have a good photograph of Thomas Lane. He might be white also, but we have this guy right here, you know, J. Alexander Kuhn in the middle, and then we've got To Tao. Well, what's really striking about these guys is their background in contrast to his. So you got Derek Chauvin, who'd been on the department for almost, what, 20 years? No, 17 years. 17 years he was working at as a bouncer in a club and being noted at this club for being basically an ass. You know, not just taking care of the situations that normally happen in clubs, especially if you have to deal with it as a bouncer, but coming on way over the top in dealing with these people. Which, when you look at what he's doing, he's basically putting his knee. If you've watched the videos, he's putting his knee on George Floyd's carotid artery. I mean, that's a death move. You don't do that kind of stuff, okay? Especially when you're working in law enforcement. And it's like, you know, why is he doing this? And it's like, no, you just do not do this when you're in law enforcement. So we've got Derek Chauvin right here. Then we've got J. Alexander Kuhn, and then we've got To Tao. Okay, so Tao is Hmong, and I have, you know, personally, that's my first combat experience. If you read my book, Bamboo Chest, you'd know that one was a book that I wrote about my experiences with the Hmong up at the Thai-Lao border. And the first time I'd ever seen somebody get killed up close and personal was a Hmong guerrilla by the name of Xiong. Okay, so I have a lot of respect for the Hmong people, and it's sad that here we got a situation where we got an officer who is also been written up, and he happens to be Hmong. And this guy, To Tao, let's talk about To. So To, he himself had, let's say, what was it, 7, let's see, he was arrested, and he had complaints put up against, 6 complaints. Before the arrest of George Floyd, he had 6 complaints. And then we've got, let's go back to J. Alexander. J. Alexander, 13 things about cops involved. It's actually a good write-up on the thing. And he was hired in 2017. He was licensed in 2019. So that means basically he's able to carry. So he's fresh off. So you've got all these guys deferring to the bully. Because Derek Chauvin, he's got seniority over everybody else. So how does this guy stay in there? Well, let's get into racism. And this is the thing I was going to talk about. It's like, it just blows me away that people make it a racist card, and the only ones who seem to be making a racist card are the ones who are trying to create division. It's like, when I look at a person, I don't look at a person based on their color. I mean, I was raised overseas. I was like the minority in most countries that I lived in as a child. And when I went and worked overseas, I was also the minority in that country. So if I had the attitude of Derek Chauvin in those countries, I would have gotten killed the first year I was there, right? Yeah. But how? So racism, what is racism? Let's go into it on a genetic level, how it comes about. Because racism, prejudice, and talk about prejudice. You know, one of the saddest experience I had to deal with personally, because I'm half Ecuadorian. So my mother's from Ecuador. So being raised in Southeast Asia, I didn't learn until later that my mom had dealt with a lot of prejudice against her. Okay? Because she's Hispanic. I'm half Hispanic. To me, it wasn't as bad because I got lighter skin. My eyes are hazel. You know, depending on whether it's blue or green. So, and when I was a kid, I was blonde. So coming from that background, but I'm half Hispanic. So if you look at me, people say, oh, well, you're not that Hispanic. Okay, so what does that Hispanic happen to be? Again, it's this prejudice and this division. And this is the thing about it. One of the things I learned in combat is that color means nothing. Okay? Color means nothing, because when you're in combat, what matters is how many people you've got fighting alongside you and covering your back. That really matters. You know, how is it that you can be in combat with people and every one of them has got different colors, and yet we all call ourselves brothers to each other? Okay? Why is that? That's because we're united against something. What we're united against at that time was communism and totalitarianism, which incidentally is actually what we're dealing with right now, and people don't get it. And we're being used by the media. And see, I was a newsman. I started as a newsman. Remember that. I started as a newsman. I worked for AP, Reuters, Agence France Presse. I was a photographer for them. Okay? Freelance. But reason I did freelance is because they would never send me to the places that I wanted to go. Why? Oh, insurance costs. That's why some of the best photography, like Michael Young, he's a freelancer. He goes to some very dangerous places. He never gets sent by AFP, AP, well, back in the day, UPI, CNN. They don't send those people into the real hot places because they know if those people get killed, they got to pay their families off. And that's what it comes down to, is money. Money and control. So who's getting the benefit of this? Money and control. Because right now you've got all these people who are burning their own homes down. They're not going into where the power elite live. Because if you do that, you got to deal with armed security, like solid armed security. Now, let's get back to this. So armed security. Here we got this situation where you got Derek Chauvin. This is a guy who should never have been a cop in the first place. Then you've got Jay Alexander, seems to have been a nice guy, but he's the young guy. He's just basically got to pay attention to what the older guys are doing and telling, and so they're standing around and watching this. Again, Total, what's up with him? How come he's not saying, hey, this is wrong, man, look what you're doing? You're putting your knee on a guy's carotid artery. I mean, that's how you kill people. And yet they think this is okay, and people are saying, oh, well, you know, that's an okay move. Yeah, that's like putting somebody into a sleeper hold. That's not an okay move either. You do it wrong, you kill somebody. Yeah. So we got these guys, but everybody's focusing on Derek Chauvin in the media. Nobody talks about that there are actually a minimum of 2 other law enforcement who are people of, quote, color. Actually, we're all people of color. We just happen to be white. Like I happen to be, I guess, white. I'm also Latino. What does that mean? Oh, okay, that means that suddenly it's a point of division. It's a point of prejudice or point of difference. So let's understand that a little bit more. So why do we have prejudice? Oh, by the way, did you notice I'm using my old cup that I used to do in my old show, the first start of these episodes? Yeah, that was the end of production, the wedding cake on the show. I thought I'd bring that up today. But let's get down on a scientific understanding of what racism is. Racism is just another form of prejudice. And what is prejudice? Prejudice is to look at something or someone or some event and have a prejudice towards that, which means that you have a point of separation and you feel separate from that. Prejudice, which is to say that you're better than or separate from whatever that may be. So what is that? What that is here is a situation where you're looking at let's say a person, you look at somebody and people don't want to admit this, but it's scientifically been proven. You make your decision on someone within the first 3 or 4 seconds. Like, if you saw me earlier in, 2 episodes before, I had long hair. You look at long hair and go, that guy's a hippie. Oh, okay. Or long beard, that guy's not clean shaven. Okay, right now I'm not clean shaven because it's like keeping some barb on your cheeks and everything up here in Alaska keeps the mosquitoes away. And actually, the reason I have long hair at that time of the year still, when the first restart of the show came on, was because I'd gone through winter. It's right now, my ears are cold when I go outside. I got to wear something to keep my ears warm. And that's why I have long hair. So that's one of the reasons, the benefits that I use that. So here, take a look at this. You look at racism and prejudice. What is it? This is actually ingrained in all human beings. It's actually ingrained in all mammals. Okay? With human beings, let's go back even further into this. Let's say the savannah, primitive man. You're going along, you're trying to stay alive, and you see something. Now, it could be like a butterfly, one of those big giant moths that has these eyes, and that's actually a protective evolution on that moth or butterfly, so that it looks like 2 eyes. And it looks like 2 eyes because the immediate response is like, oh shoot, what is that? Is that a predator? Because primitive man will be walking in and say, are those eyes looking at me? Because binocular vision is actually what you get for predators. So like tigers, lions, they all have binocular. Deer have their eyes going out a little bit, and that's in order to protect themselves. Okay? So we have these evolutions, and so we have snap decisions that we make based on a prejudice. And these have evolved over these thousands and thousands of years to the point, hey, Johnny. Ciao. And we look at this, and we look at how we get into an event, and our immediate, because we are the offspring of thousands and thousands of years of development, that's ingrained in us to react to response. We as sentient beings and being able to think about things, we meet people, and now we've learned to meet them, respond in a manner so that we can talk. Some people don't. Some people automatically would go with that prejudice and just blow somebody off or feel a separation or division between themselves and the other person. Okay? And that's how you get people who come off as bigots. And you have people who are prejudiced and they are racist because of how they were either raised culturally, how they had a personal response. And I'm not saying this is the fact, but let's say that Derek Chauvin, when he was a kid, he lived in a neighborhood and he got beat up by a black guy, by a black kid. So because of that, from then on, he's got an attitude about black people. In the same way, you've got somebody who's black who got beat up by a white or got beat up by a white cop. Yeah. So racism is always a bad thing, but violence is not acceptable. Riots not mean that Protestants have to stole. Exactly. And that's the thing. We'll talk about that. The response, there's a difference between protest. This is what guaranteed by our U.S. Constitution is the right to protest. But we're not in protest anymore. What we're in now is rioting, looting, and an opportunity for enemies of the United States to come in and disrupt peaceful protest in order to achieve their goals. And we're going to talk about a book that's really important to understand, and that is Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky. I'm telling everybody to read the book. I was starting to reread it again last night because as I was reading, it's the open in there. He's talking about we're all frustrated with how things are going in society, and this is the 1960s all over again. I always talk about history if you study history, there's nothing new. The long hair of the 60s, go back 100 years, 200 years, they had the long hair there. The revolution, the protesting in the streets, every time going back in the 1800s, in the 1700s, going back into moments of awakening and enlightenment, go back through each one of those and you'll see how history is repeating itself. So here we've got this situation. I mean, it's kind of funny, like John Cusack, I mean, He's he's trying to be his dad. John Cusack's father was also a wannabe actor. Okay, Cusack's son and daughter ended up being successful, so they become the progeny. But now John Cusack wants to be his dad, revolting against the impingement of society. It'll always be there. It'll continue to be there, and that's the sad thing about it. That's what gives us something to fight against. Great. But it's how you fight against this. Do you fight against this by burning somebody's house down, or worse? And this is the thing that really pisses me off. Who's this? Yeah. How many people recognize who this is? Retired police chief of St. Louis, Missouri, David Dorn. And it's, watching the video of him dying last night because a guy was filming this on his cell phone, on his iPhone. I'm watching the guy, and at that point his mouth was still trying to speak words and everything, but he was dead. I mean, he was basically done. He'd been shot in the gut, and it's all over the internet. And you can go. I'm not going to put that video up because I see no reason to bring it up. But here's this guy who got killed by the looters, shot by the looters. Okay, and they were black too. So there you go. And the media doesn't want to talk about the black on black killings. And when you look at it, black on black is actually worse than white on black. And if you look at it also, you'll notice there's a lot of white on white killing. So what is this all about? This is all about using events and focusing on something such as will fit the agenda. And anything that is creating division in this country right now, after all the things we've gone through over the last 50, 60 years, think about it. Since like 1964, look at what's been happening in this country. And it's all in the media has been about division and creating division. Because if we have no division in this country, we would actually be cleaning out those who would keep us divided. There's an old saying, divide and conquer. Right now, the Chinese are trying to ride on that. That's why they kept TikTok open, they kept Snapchat open, and they kept Zoom open, so that Antifa and all the terrorists, and they're terrorists. They're not protesters. There are the protesters, and then there are the terrorists. And the terrorists are groups like Antifa. And I just say Antifa because that's one of them. There are various Black Lives Matter. That's a terrorist organization as far as I'm concerned, because they're not doing anything in order to help bring peace to the country. They're trying to create division and more animosity between all races. I got a video of these Mexicans in an elevator, and they're being beat up by black guys, 3 black guys, and the Mexican's not responding because, from what I heard, he's an illegal and he doesn't want to bring attention, so he's not going to go and report that he got attacked. But nobody talks about that because it doesn't fit the agenda. Remember, division. It's all about divide and conquer. So as long as they can keep the American citizens, and actually citizens of the world, divided based on color, they're going to do it, because that's the one that has been so written about, so described through history, modern history. You didn't hear about that before. If you read the writings from before, it was all about actual social, economic status between the poor and the rich. And actually, think about that. If that's what it was about before, was describing the rift between the rich and the poor, and now suddenly we're dealing with race. Why is that? Because in my view, it's actually more about the rich and the poor, because in this country we had a solid middle class, and that's what separated us against every other country in the world, was a solid middle class. The only other country that had something even close was Switzerland. Okay, and it's interesting that Switzerland copied, back in the 1800s, Switzerland copied the U.S. Constitution and brought that, including the Second Amendment. And that's how you protect a society. And that's interesting because it's going to bring up the question of, what is this Insurrection Act of 1807? What is it about the Insurrection Act as compared to just straight martial law? The interesting thing about the Insurrection Act of 1807 is that it enables the president to go after people who are creating insurrection and are going against the people. Because the insurrection is against the freedoms of the people. So that means people like Pelosi and Sanders and Biden actually should be scared because they're helping incite riot. They're helping incite attacks on the common citizens. Because who are the ones who are being attacked right now? Who are the ones who are actually feeling the brunt of all this? It's not the power elite. It's the common citizen who's got his or her own store and they're trying to defend it. You know, how many killings have occurred of innocent civilians by the looters, these terrorists who've gone in and been killing people and burning things down? When you protest, and see, this is the thing about protesting. Protesting is really good for getting the word out, and then you stop. And then you go on to the next, which is you then get your people that you want in, you get them voted in. And then you change the laws. Like right now, my biggest thing are term limits. Because one of the biggest problems in this country is term limits. We have term limits on the president, but we don't have term limits on the people who've gotten so wealthy. When you've got a situation where you've got people come in and are willing to pay $4 million in a campaign to get into a position that pays, what, $68,000 a year? Something's wrong there, or something's really suspicious. Who pays $4 million to get into a position where they're going to make, in the upper $60,000 a year? Unless they're going to get bought out with millions and millions of dollars over the next decade or however long they can stay in office. So whoever's been funding them is going to come in and call them chits. And that's what you're seeing right now. That's how cattywonk it is in this country right now. It's all over the place. So let's take a look further. So we've got David Dorn. Okay. Then we've got, David Patrick Underwood. Back in the Bay Area where I used to live. Got killed in Oakland. And that was a drive-by shooting. Just shot him because he was in a uniform. So that's what's happening here. But what's happening, more importantly, is that nobody's talking about how these guys continue to work. I mean, with Jay Alexander, he's the new guy. But Dow and Chauvin, these guys have been there at least 6 years. So what's up with that? And I see this in many fields, and that is the union. The union has gotten so bad now that they're protecting people who should have been fired. It's kind of like, cover my back, I cover your back kind of deal. Well, when you're covering the back of somebody who's just a bully, like this guy Chauvin, who's got 18, reprimand and call-ups, and then you've got Tao, who's got 6, that's two things that's happening. And I see this in military and I see it in law enforcement. And that is the question of training and skills. People who shouldn't be in positions anymore, but they don't want to rock the boat. And the training people are getting in military and law enforcement. Some of it is good, but a lot of it lately has gotten down. And the way you can tell that is when you have any type of military or law enforcement where they continue to substitute technique and skills with technology. Let's give you an example. Okay, so back in the 80s, they came out with the M16A2. Why did they come out with the M16A2? And then the Marines automatically got the M16A2, which I was mind blown because Marines have the reputation of always being well trained. So the M16A2, what is it? It cycles. So it cycles over so that you'd only get a 3-shot burst out of it. You either have flip onto semi and then onto auto. You'd have a select where you have a burst. So you get burst or you would get semi. So you get a single shot for a trigger pull, or you would get 3-shot. And actually, depending on how the gear would move over, whether you got a 3-shot burst or you got a 2-shot burst or you got a 1-shot burst. Can you imagine being in combat and suddenly having your weapon, you think you're going to get a 3-shot burst on it because you're providing covering fire, or you're going through a room and you want to just open up, and at least get 3 shots out of that, and you fire one and oh shoot, then you got to hit the trigger again, and then you got your 3-shot burst. That's pretty screwy, and I hated the M16A2 for that very reason. But it was an excuse. It was taking technology to replace people being trained properly on how to do a 2 to 3 shot burst, which is all you need. 2 to 3 shot burst. I mean, I'll shoot some video next week, and I'll show you how hot I can run just a common AR-15, and to the point that you'll actually start to see the heat coming off of that thing. Imagine running a full auto weapon, you know, and if it's not an M60, and even an M60, you want to keep it with 3-shot burst, 3-shot burst, even with a full belt. You don't want to keep on firing like that. So here we go. We got unions, and the unions are not what they were back in the 1800s. They're not what they were in the early 1900s. Now we talk about deep state. This is an example of deep state. Deep state is so descriptive of what's happening right here, which is deep state is just bureaucracy. It's just people covering their backs because they want to collect their check, they want to collect their retirement, and they want to, you know, they want to do their years, and they just want to get out. And so we've got this situation where more and more people are going in there, and so they're covering each other's back when people should be fired. You know how hard it is to fire somebody who gets into a government position? Think about that. I said I was going to talk about Fauci. We'll talk about Fauci soon enough. I'm putting all that stuff together and just trying to show out, because there's so much information on Fauci and what he did with the NIH. And as I say with that guy, Peter Daszak over at Echo Health Alliance. Google it. Peter Daszak. Is there a call? It's Daszak. But just go Echo, ECO, and then Health Alliance. Google that. And Bat Lady. And you'll see how that funding went over there. This is the same thing here. It's covering people's backs when people should have been fired. And this is an example. Oh, it's kind of funny. It says credit union in the back. Well, get rid of credit and put police union. So the police union is covering these guys. They're getting brought up by internal affairs. Chauvin, internal affairs. So how many years has this been going on? This guy should have been fired or put on a desk job. Never should have been dealing with the people directly. Why? Because he's a freaking bully. He's a psychopath. And here he is. He's in prison. Well, he's in jail. And I heard he already got beat up by somebody. So he thought he was going to keep control of the situation like he was still a cop. He's not a cop anymore. He never should have been a cop in the first place. He never should have been a bouncer. Shoot. Could you imagine? I'm surprised nobody sued the bar that he was working at, the club that he was working at. I would have sued the club if I was dealt with somebody like that. This is ridiculous. I mean, we're in a situation where people are backing up people who should have been fired immediately. And this comes down to the unions. You ever worked as a carpenter? I worked as a carpenter. Friends of mine worked as carpenters, and they were in the union. Okay? And now the unions are keeping people in carpentry unions. Medical unions. How many people work as nurses or in the medical field who should have been fired for what they're doing, endangering people? Okay? These unions are now not doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is protecting the employee and protecting the clients of the services of those employees. That's not happening anymore, because if you're work in the medical field, if you work in law enforcement, the whole idea is in law enforcement, protect and serve. The whole saying, protect and serve. Here, it's become a situation of control and beat. Why? Because either the person's not been reprimanded and dealt with appropriately, as Chauvin should have been. Then you've also got Tao, who should have been looked at in an earlier time. So now he's getting out of town. He's out of town. Chauvin's in prison. They're going to go get Tao. And then Jay Alexander, he's the new guy. And so if you got this carrying on, you don't have proper training with people bringing it on and getting it over with the proper training and dealing with people who shouldn't be in those forms in those positions. They shouldn't be in law enforcement. Okay. So, man, it comes back down to how they're inciting everybody with the media. And if you read this book right here, if you read this one right here, you'll see I write about this kind of stuff in there. I write about all how the media is just playing everybody. The media is just playing everybody. Right there. So you want to be a reality TV star? What was that really? Yeah, I use the vehicle of acting on Treasure Quest Snake Island. But think about that. So you want to be a reality TV star? What's really happening there? All those pictures, me in combat, us in the boat coming back, the fake gold mask from that was created by the art director. What reality show has an art director? A drama show does. Yeah. And how did when me on the front page of the Chronicle when I came back from prison in Vietnam. And that's the thing about it. What is it about what's happening with the media? See, remember when I went into Vietnam, I went in because there was a guy who was going after Captain Kidd's treasure on an island off the west coast of Vietnam. It was a perfect vehicle for me to get in and find out what was happening with the American MIAs. Remember the story of the American MIAs? Colonel Bo Greitz, Bo Greitz, who was backed by Clint Eastwood and William Shatner, Captain Kirk. This is what was happening in the 80s, and we wanted to find out what was happening with the American MIAs. And people were trying to find the story and reporting that story back. Now, it's all about how can we create disorder and chaos. And for the media, people are glued to the TV. So, I can't believe what's happening in Minneapolis. I can't believe what's happening in San Francisco. I've got to watch. It's like what's happening now. Media has gotten to the point that they've realized, wow, if we just recreate the scene of a car accident or a train wreck, it'll be just like the gawkers driving by, and they just got to look. They got to look. And so while everybody's looking at that, what happens is they get to pop up more advertising. So while everybody's been locked up under this lockdown, this COVID lockdown, which, by the way, that's going to be really interesting because the joke that's going around with my buddies and I is like, yeah, you got all these guys demonstrating and protesting, and they're definitely not staying away from each other. But the funny thing about it is all these Antifa guys they're rolling on top of each other while they're doing this, and they're getting into fist fights and blows. So they're going to get infected with the COVID, and they're going to go home to mommy and daddy because most of these guys who are in Antifa, that's the reason they got time to go off and do this. People are actually working and trying to, feed kids and feed a family. They have no time to go off and do this. But these kids at Antifa, they get paid. They're getting paid to go do this. The pamphlets are all over. They've done this for years. So they got these pamphlets, and they're going off, and they're gonna get more of this CCP virus, and they're gonna bring it home, and then their parents are gonna get it. And if they're elderly or they're in a situation that's compromised, they're gonna die from it. So they're gonna kill their parents. And so their parents who've been, paying off the house or whatever will be gone, and they won't have any money coming in because they've been supported by their parents. That's the demographic of people who are members of these terrorist organizations, because they've got the time to go off and do this, and they're getting a little bit of cash to keep doing this, and they don't have to worry about paying rent because why? They're being supported by mommy and daddy. Idle hands. It comes all the way back to idle hands. So think about that. You got a situation where all these idle hands, and what are they going to do? They're excited. They get pumped up. They get the adrenaline rush of running down through the streets. And if some of them were like the sons and grandsons or children of the grandchildren or children of those who demonstrated in the 60s, they get to make it look, get that feeling of, wow, this must have been what it was like for mommy and daddy when they were, resisting the Vietnam War and all this kind of stuff, So where's the money coming from? And why is this going? Why is the media just getting pumped up? It's because it's profitable. It's profitable to the media to watch the news because then they can come back and say, we've got a certain number of viewers, and then they go to their advertisers and say, hey, it's just like reality TV. Reality TV was making money. And why was it making money? It wasn't making money for the actors, because that's part of the program, is you pay the actors poorly, and in my situation, you lie to them and tell them you're going to go do a documentary, and then you get on set and realize, wait, this is all scripted. This is 100% scripted, and what's really happening is you're using my real history, my real personal history, my real famous personal history, and then you're bringing it onto your show to create credibility for your fake documentary, okay? And you pump it up because people are going to say, oh my God, is Cork going to find the treasure? Is Cork going to find the treasure? Cork will never find the treasure. Or as I told my co-star, Keith Plaskett, I said, Senior Chief, you do realize we are never going to find treasure on this show. And he's a bona fide treasure hunter. He's been doing it for years. He loves doing that kind of stuff. Me, I was just brought on because I had the history that was publicly recorded. If you go to Google and you type in my birth name, Frederick, and then Graham, Graham, and Frederick, and Library of Congress, and Vietnam, all the publicly released documents under the Freedom of Information Act are now available at the Library of Congress. And you can read all about the different communiques. We're going back and forth between State Department and DIA, DOD. That's when George Shultz was the Secretary of State, and Casper, the Friendly Ghost, Casper Weinberger was over at DOD. So, and that was during the Reagan times, but it's all about selling ad space. So we got a situation where we got the media, we're pain pleasure. Why do people do things? People do things out of pain pleasure. So the pain, they're avoiding not making money, and the pleasure is they're making a lot of money. So you got the media that's selling ad space on their news, and that's Fox News, that's CNN, all of them, every one of them. They're focused on that. Thankfully, some channels are actually talking about the idea that it's not a race thing, it's a ineptitude thing. It's an ineptitude with the police unions, and it's criminal. Think about it. Police unions are protecting these people and not letting them either be thrown in jail. Well, now it got to the point where they had to, and the police union couldn't protect them. Okay? When it got so public, when it gets so public like this, that is the best thing about this, is it brings to light what the police unions are doing, or any type of union now, because it's all about making, and again, it's making money. So they'll collect their dues from the employees, so they'll collect their union members. So they collect their dues from the union members, and all that money goes into the union leadership. So it's it's a pyramid scheme. So instead of doing their job, which is to guarantee the quality of police officer, instead they're protecting the police officer who should have been fired in the first place. I mean, called up 18 times over these how many years? And yet, Chauvin is still working for the Minneapolis Police Department? That's pretty screwed up. And I put it 100% on the police unions as to why this guy was still there. And the police department, who was kowtowing to the union. But that's the thing about it. The unions have so much power over these departments because it's government to government. It's one government to another government. The union is another government. And all it's doing is making money and for its leadership. In the same way that our government now through taxation is making money for a lot of people. And also back deals by all our senators and through Congress. So all this is happening as a result of how the system has gotten so taken advantage of by the people who should be protecting it and are actually destroying it. So think about that. Get a copy of my book. It's available over at Amazon. It might be eye-opening, not just about reality TV, but how reality TV and specifically media. I'm going to talk a lot more about media. Actually, stuff that I talk about in the book. I talk about my childhood in Vietnam and Saigon and the Tet Offensive and how seeing things as they were as compared to how it was being reported when I got back to the States, when we moved home, we moved back to the States in the 70s, and to learn what people were getting as to what they thought Vietnam was about. But they weren't there in the streets. They weren't seeing it from the top of our house and interacting with people. So that's the thing about it. It's like, boots on the ground as compared to what you're getting through your TV monitor about what's really happening in the news. And if people would cover about what's happening, which is it's just looting, and it's a situation where people are just totally at the mercy of a media that is no longer protecting the people. And I'd be interested, can the Insurrection Act of 1807 that President Trump is talking about using, and how to use it, it goes against those who would try to destroy the country. Because in my view, the media right now is doing a really good job of trying to destroy the country through increasing the level of division and separation between the people, instead of what it should be doing, which is just informing people and letting people make decisions on what they see, instead of selectively going towards something that they know will hit those who will be more emotionally impacted by something, as compared to people who would make a decision. They would continue and improve the situation for all Americans. And we'll talk about something else later. Well, that's my close on that. Pay attention to the unions and stop being led around by the media on how the media can do it so well through playing on your emotions and emotional cards that have been hit on before.